The spoonful of yogurt stopped inches from Arthur's mouth. His eyes, previously clouded by the morning's apathy, now fixed on a specific point over Lucia's shoulder. His body, normally relaxed in the wheelchair, stiffened, and a low sound, a groan of frustration, escaped his thin lips. Lucia, the caregiver in her early 30s, followed his gaze to the picture frame on the shelf. It was an old, yellowed photo of a smiling woman next to a lighthouse. He hadn't been able to speak since the stroke, but his eyes were screaming. Lucia placed the yogurt on the small table and approached the shelf, feeling the weight of that silent, urgent communication that only she seemed to try to decipher. With the picture frame in her hands, she knelt beside the wheelchair. "It's your wife, isn't it, Mr. Arthur?" Mrs. Helena. Her name made him look directly at her, the intensity in his face turning into a silent plea. He raised his left hand, the only one with movement, and touched the glass of the photo with a trembling index finger. It wasn't just longing, there was something more, an unfinished task, a request lost in the fog of his condition. Lucia felt a pang in her chest, a mix of compassion and helplessness, as she tried to translate that gesture. The Tuesday morning, which should have been quiet, was beginning, fraught with an anguish she didn't know how to relieve. The living room door opened with a dry click, and the figure of Marcos, Arthur's son, filled the space. At 50, he wore an impeccable suit that seemed out of place in the modest home. His eyes quickly scanned the scene. Lucia kneeling, his father agitated, the photo in her hand, and his face hardened into an expression of restrained impatience. What is going on here? Lucia, why hasn't he had his breakfast yet? It's almost 9 o'clock. His voice was controlled but carried an authority that always left a trail of discomfort in the air. He didn't ask what his father was feeling. He only pointed out a flaw in the schedule. Lucia stood up, carefully placing the picture frame back on the small table. "He got agitated, Mr. Marcos. I think he's trying to tell us something about the photo." Marcos let out a sigh, a sound Lucia knew well, the soundtrack to his disbelief. "Lucia, please. He gets agitated. It's his condition. You don't need to create theories for every gesture. The job here is to follow the routine. Feeding, hygiene, medication. No distractions." The word distractions hung in the air, and Lucia understood that, to Marcos, Arthur's memories and desires were exactly that. A silent injustice was settling in the way a son reduced his father's existence to a mere procedures manual. Marcos approached his father and adjusted the collar of his pajamas with a cold efficiency, without meeting his eyes. "Come on, Dad. You have to eat to get strong." Arthur turned his face away, refusing the spoon that Marcos now held, his eyes still seeking Lucia's, as if asking for help. Seeing the refusal, Marcos frowned and turned to the caregiver. "He never does this. You must have given him something different yesterday, didn't you? A cookie that wasn't on the meal plan, perhaps? I've already told you that any change, no matter how small, needs my approval. His glucose could spike. Do you understand the responsibility of that?" The accusation was subtle, but it planted a seed of blame, casting Lucia as incompetent. She took a deep breath, remaining calm. "He ate exactly what you prescribed, the vegetable soup and mashed fruit." As she answered, she noticed that Arthur had managed to grab the picture frame from the table. His fingers trembled, but he held the object against his chest like a shield. Lucia felt a wave of affection for that stubborn gesture. It was the only weapon he had. Ignoring the scene, Marcos just shook his head, defeated by his father's stubbornness. "Leave it. I have to go to a meeting. At lunchtime, make sure he eats. No excuses, and especially no sentimental inventions." He left, leaving behind a heavy silence and the certainty that today would be a battle. Alone with Arthur again, Lucia felt the atmosphere change. The tension left by Marcos gradually dissipated, replaced by the calm she strove to build. She took out the small speaker, a simple device she kept in her backpack, and connected her phone. In seconds, the voice of a classic singer filled the room with a familiar samba. It was his favorite song. Arthur's shoulders immediately relaxed, and a long sigh, almost of relief, escaped his chest. He still held the photo, but now his gaze had lost its anguish. It was just a look of remembrance, lulled by the melody that connected him to another time. Lucia sat in the armchair across from him, watching. Small gestures, that's how she understood him. The way he drummed his fingers on the wood of the wheelchair in time with the music. the slight curve of his lips that could almost be a smile. They were tiny victories in a universe of limitations. She picked up the yogurt again, and this time when she offered the spoon, he accepted. He ate everything, slowly, his eyes closed as if savoring not just the food, but the peace of that moment. For Lucia, that was the proof. Arthur wasn't a set of symptoms. He was a person who needed to be heard, even in silence. The doorbell rang promptly at 10 o'clock. It was Jonas, the physical therapist, a middle-aged man with a kind smile and steady hands. He had been working with Arthur for almost a year and had a keen perception of the house's dynamics. As he entered, his eyes caught the picture frame in Arthur's lap. "Good morning, champ." Reminiscing about the good old days with Helena, huh? The way he spoke, with naturalness and affection, made Arthur look up and nod discreetly. Jonas was an ally, someone who saw the person behind the illness. He greeted Lucia with a nod, noticing the slightly charged atmosphere. As Jonas began the light exercises, carefully moving Arthur's arms and legs to prevent atrophy, he struck up a conversation with Lucia in a low voice. "Has Marcos already been by today?" Lucia confirmed with a nod, not needing to go into detail. His expression said it all. "I figured. Arthur is always more tense after he comes. I've noticed it's gotten worse in the last few weeks. Marcos has been more controlling than usual. Before, he was concerned about his well-being. Now he seems more concerned with the rules." Jonas's words validated what Lucia felt, showing her she wasn't alone in her perception. His suspicion was a small beacon in the confusion of that day. Jonas continued, his voice a professional whisper so only Lucia could hear. "Last week, for example, he called me to question why I had done an extra 10 minutes of relaxation massage. He said the plan covered exactly 50 minutes per session and that I wasn't supposed to exceed the agreement. I didn't understand it. We're talking about his father's health, not a business transaction." The revelation shocked Lucia. That attitude showed a pattern of behavior that went beyond simple concern. It was a financial and procedural control that overrode human care, and it left her deeply uneasy, questioning Marcos's true motivations. At the end of the session, as Lucia helped Arthur drink a glass of water, Jonas packed his equipment. Before leaving, he approached her and said seriously, "Keep an eye out, Lucia. I've known Mr. Arthur long enough to know he's lucid. He understands everything. If he's trying to tell you something, it's because it's important. Don't let them convince you otherwise." The warning sounded almost like a password, a silent pact between the two caregivers. Jonas's suspicion was no longer just an impression. It was a shared certainty. He left, and Lucia felt her sense of responsibility weigh even more heavily. She had to understand what Arthur wanted to say. With Arthur resting in his room, Lucia decided to do the weekly tidying of the living room, a task that was usually quick. As she dusted the bookshelf, something caught her attention. The picture frame of Helena, which Arthur had held so tightly, seemed to have a slightly loose back. Curiosity, mixed with the intuition that this was a piece of the puzzle, made her pick up the object again. Carefully, she pried at the cardboard backing. It gave way easily, revealing not only the photo, but a small, folded piece of paper, hidden there for who knows how long. Lucia's heart raced. It was a note. The paper was old, with the elegant and slightly shaky handwriting of a woman. The message was short, a loving reminder. "My dearest Arthur, don't forget our promise. The beach house is for the boys, but the lighthouse is our story. Take care of it for me. With all my love, Helena." Lucia reread the sentence twice. The lighthouse, the photo, the promise. Suddenly, Arthur's agitation from the morning took on a new meaning. It wasn't just the photo of his wife. It was the place in the photo. He wasn't just missing her. He was protecting a legacy, a memory he perhaps felt was under threat. The discovery was small, but it opened a giant door. Lunch was tense. Marcos returned, and his presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He served his father the soup, ignoring Arthur's distant gaze, who seemed lost in thought ever since Lucia had shown him the note. She had seen him read his wife's words, and for the first time, silent tears had streamed down his face. It was a mixture of relief and pain. Relief at being understood, pain at not being able to express himself. Now, in front of his son, he closed himself off again, a fortress of silence. Marcos, oblivious to everything, was only concerned with the spoonfuls. See? With me, he eats properly. You just need a firm hand, Lucia. Firmness, not sentimentalism. As Marcos spoke, his cell phone rang. He answered, stepping out onto the balcony, but his voice carried through the glass door. No, I haven't gotten the signature yet. He's more stubborn than ever. Yes, I know about the buyer's deadline, but I can't force it right now. It'll look suspicious. Buyer? Signature? The words floated to Lucia and collided with the information from Helena's note. What was Marcos trying to sell? Her intuition screamed. The lighthouse. The promise. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a painful thud. Marcos wasn't taking care of his father. He was managing an estate against his will. The injustice now had a name. Greed. After Marcos left again, an oppressive silence filled the house. Lucia felt the weight of the discovery on her shoulders. It was no longer just a matter of care. It was a matter of justice. She looked at Arthur, who was watching her back with stunning clarity. In his eyes, there was no confusion, only the determination of someone fighting an invisible battle. He raised his hand and pointed to the landline phone on the small table next to the sofa. The gesture was unmistakable. He wanted her to call someone, but who? She grabbed a notepad and a pen, a technique they sometimes used. You want me to call someone? Try to show me. She started listing names. Jonas, the physical therapist? He shook his head no. Your other son, the one who lives down south? Another negative shake. She thought about Marcos's conversation. Buyer. Deadlines. She felt a chill. What if the call wasn't for an ally but for the adversary? The realtor? The buyer? Frown. Arthur. Frustration returning. He pointed again to the phone, then to an old leather-bound address book in the table's drawer. Lucia understood. The answer wasn't in her head, but there, in that record of a lifetime of contacts. Lucia picked up the leather-bound book. The pages were worn with time, filled with names and numbers written in Arthur's and Helena's handwriting. She began to flip through, pausing on each page so he could see. She went past friends, old doctors, distant relatives. He remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the pages, waiting. The tension in the small room was palpable. Every turn of a page was a new chance, a new failure. Lucia felt the mental exhaustion of this decoding, but Arthur's focused expression kept her from giving up. He trusted her, and that trust was her fuel. Finally, in the letter T, he made a guttural sound, a sharp, urgent, "Ah!" and tapped his finger forcefully on a name. Dr. Tavares, lawyer. Next to the name, a note from Helena. Friend and guardian angel. Lucia felt a shiver. This was it. This was the defensive move. Arthur didn't just want to protect a memory. He wanted to fight with the weapons of the law. She looked from the book to his face. There was a flicker of hope in his eyes, an urgency that said, now, before it's too late. She picked up the phone, her hands trembling slightly, and dialed the number that could change the course of that day and their lives. The voice on the other end of the line was calm and experienced. Tavares Law Office, good afternoon. Lucia took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts to sound coherent and not just like a desperate caregiver. Good afternoon. My name is Lucia. I'm Mr. Arthur Fontez's caregiver. I'm calling at his request. There was a pause. Arthur's? But he can't speak. How did he ask for this? The question was fair, and Lucia explained as best she could. The agitation, the photo, the address book, the finger pointing at his name. She spoke, quietly, afraid a neighbor might overhear, feeling like a conspirator for a good cause. To her surprise, Dr. Tavares didn't dismiss her. On the contrary, his tone became more serious. I see. I've known Arthur for over 40 years. I know he has always been a man of great resolve. Where are you? I'll be there in an hour. The relief Lucia felt was so intense she had to sit down. An hour. In an hour, they would have a powerful ally by their side. She hung up the phone and turned to Arthur, who had heard the entire conversation. He gave a slight nod, a gesture of approval that to her was worth more than any words. Hope now had a name and was on its way. As they waited, an electric anxiety filled the house. Lucia made fresh coffee, more to keep her hands busy than out of any desire to drink it. She looked out the window every 5 minutes, her heart beating a little faster with every passing car. Arthur, for his part, was remarkably calm. It was the calm of someone who had finally managed to send a message in a bottle out to sea and was now awaiting rescue. He picked up Helena's photo again, but this time his gaze was serene. He seemed to be talking to her in silence, telling her he was keeping the promise. Dr. Tavares arrived 45 minutes later. He was a gentleman in his 70s with white hair and a look that inspired immediate confidence. He didn't carry the haste of the business world, but the deliberation of one who understands the weight of time. He greeted Lucia with a firm handshake and went directly to Arthur. "My friend, it's good to see you." He sat across from Arthur, ignoring a chair and moving closer to be on the same level. "Lucia told me you need me. I'm here. What is your son up to?" The direct, no-nonsense question showed Lucia that he already suspected something. Arthur extended a trembling hand and gave the picture frame with Helena's note to the lawyer. Dr. Tavares read the small paper, his lips tightening into a thin line. "The promise of the lighthouse. I remember. Helena made me promise I would take care of this if anything happened to her. She never trusted Marcos with matters of the heart." He looked at Arthur with complicity. "He's trying to sell it, isn't he?" Arthur closed his eyes tightly, a resounding yes. Lucia, who watched the scene in silence, felt as if she were witnessing the revelation of a decades-old secret. The lawyer then turned to her. "Lucia, you mentioned a signature?" She told him about the phone conversation she had overheard about the deadline and the buyer. Every word that left her mouth seemed to strengthen the case against Marcos. Dr. Tavares listened intently, nodding slowly. "This is worse than I thought. He's probably trying to get a full power of attorney, claiming his father lacks discernment. With that, he can sell whatever he wants." He then stood up and began to walk around the room, his mind working quickly. "We need to act before he returns. Arthur, do you have anything else put away? Any recent documents he gave you to sign?" Arthur nodded, his gaze turning toward his own bedroom. Lucia pushed the wheelchair to Arthur's room. The room was simple, with dark furniture and a soft scent of lavender. Arthur pointed to the bottom drawer of the dresser under his linens. Lucia opened it and found a blue plastic folder. Inside was a stack of papers. They were legal documents, full of clauses and technical terms, but the title on the first page was clear: Public Power, of attorney with full powers and responsibilities. At the end, on the line for Arthur's signature, the space was blank. Next to it, however, were several scratch sheets with attempts to imitate his old signature, some more successful than others. It was the missing proof. Dr. Tavares examined the papers with a grim expression. "This is serious. He's not just trying to get the signature, he's practicing forgery in case he fails. This is an act of desperation. The buyer must be putting pressure on him." He put the folder away, now as evidence. "Arthur, my friend, we'll have to be firm. Marcos will probably come tonight for one last try, perhaps with a notary to give it an air of legality. This is our chance. We need to be ready." He looked at Lucia with a newfound respect. "You, young lady, were very brave. Today you are not just a caregiver. You are his key witness." The next few hours dragged on with the slowness of a storm gathering on the horizon. Dr. Tavares made a few calls, speaking in a low, firm tone. He was setting up the strategy. Lucia took care of Arthur, making sure he was comfortable, but the normal routine seemed suspended in time. Every simple gesture, like adjusting a pillow or offering tea, seemed laden with new meaning. She was no longer just caring for a patient. She was protecting a man from his own son. The realization was frightening and at the same time, gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. Around 6 in the evening, Dr. Tavares sat with her in the kitchen. "Lucia, when Marcos arrives, I want you to act normally. Don't show that you know anything. I'll stay in the home office here with the door ajar. When he presents the papers to Arthur, I will enter. The element of surprise is our greatest advantage." He placed a hand on hers, a paternal gesture. "You don't need to be afraid. The law is on Arthur's side, and so is the truth." His words calmed her, but they didn't dissipate the knot in her stomach. Night was falling, and, with it, the time for confrontation was approaching. At 7:15, the key turned in the lock. Marcos entered, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, a younger man in glasses with a leather briefcase had a formal and uncomfortable air. "Good evening, Lucia. This is Mr. Guides from the notary's office. We're just here to formalize some of my father's documents. It will be quick." Marcos's tone was falsely casual, but his eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of abnormality. Lucia felt her blood run cold but maintained the neutral expression she had rehearsed. "Good evening. Mr. Arthur is in the living room, watching the news." She stepped aside, allowing them to enter, feeling like an actress in a dangerous play. They went to the living room where Arthur awaited them with an enigmatic calm. He seemed neither scared nor defiant. It was the serenity of one who knows the outcome of a battle before it even begins. Mr. Geddes, the notary, approached respectfully. "Mr. Arthur, good evening. Are you aware of the document we will be signing today?" Before Arthur could react, Marcos intervened. "Yes, he is. We've already talked about it. It's to facilitate the management of his assets, so I can take care of everything without bureaucracy." Marcos placed the briefcase on the coffee table and took out a power of attorney identical to the one Lucia had found, along with a pen. The climax had arrived. "Dad, just sign here." Marcos placed the clipboard on Arthur's lap, positioning the pen in his trembling hand. The atmosphere grew heavy, dense. The notary observed the scene with a professional expression, but a crease of doubt appeared on his forehead. Arthur looked at the paper, then at his son. His eyes, which had once pleaded, now held a cold strength, an unshakable refusal. He let the pen fall to the floor. The small plastic object rolled across the wooden floor, making a sound that echoed in the deathly silence of the room. It was a clear act of defiance, impossible to misinterpret. "He's just nervous," Marcos said, his voice a little louder, the facade of calm beginning to crack. He bent down to pick up the pen, his face red with irritation. "Dad, please, don't make things difficult. It's for your own good." It was at that moment that the office door opened. Dr. Tavares entered the room, walking slowly, with the blue folder found in Arthur's room under his arm. "I disagree, Marcos. I believe that making things difficult is exactly what your father wants to do, and he has every right." The surprise on Marcos's face was total, a mask of shock and panic replacing his arrogance. The confrontation was declared, in front of an official witness. "Dr. Tavares, what are you doing here?" Marcos stammered, struggling to compose himself. The presence of the family's old lawyer was the last thing he expected. "Your father called me, Marcos. Apparently he felt he needed a second opinion on the documents you're so anxious for him to sign." Tavares turned to the notary. "Mr. Geddes, good evening. I am the longtime lawyer for Mr. Arthur Fontes, and I must inform you that my client has no interest whatsoever in signing this power of attorney. In fact, he vehemently refuses it." He looked at Arthur, who supported him with a firm nod. Marcos tried to regain control. "This is absurd. My father is not in a condition to make decisions. He's being influenced." He shot a furious look at Lucia, who remained silent near the door. Dr. Tavares smiled, a humorless smile. "Influenced? I would say he's more lucid than ever. Lucid enough to know that you are trying to sell the lighthouse property against the explicit wishes left by your late wife." He opened the blue folder and placed Helena's note and the sheets with the forged signature attempts on the table. "And he's also lucid enough to know that you've been practicing your calligraphy." "For what exactly, Marcos?" The notary, Mr. Guides, took a step back, his face paling as he saw the scratch sheets with the forged signature. His professional demeanor crumbled, giving way to an alarmed caution. He looked from Marcos to Dr. Tavares, and then to Arthur, who maintained an impressive dignity in his wheelchair. "Gentlemen, under these circumstances I cannot proceed. The grantor's refusal is clear, and there is evidence of coercion and possible fraud. I consider this diligence concluded." He began to pack his materials hastily, wanting only to distance himself from a situation that now reeked of a crime. Marcos was cornered. The presence of the notary whom he had brought to legitimize his act now served as a witness to his attempted fraud. "This is a setup. This woman," he pointed at Lucia, his voice laced with venom. "She must have planted this. She's manipulating my father." Dr. Tavares cut him off with a sharp calm. "Stop, Marcos. Just stop. The only person who tried to manipulate Arthur here was you. For months. But you underestimated your father, and you underestimated the loyalty he inspires in those who truly care for him." The lawyer glanced at Lucia, and in that look, she saw the acknowledgement of all her effort, all her anguish from that day. Defeated, Marcos watched the notary hurry out the door, muttering a formal good evening that sounded like a verdict. He was left alone in the room, under the accusing gaze of Dr. Tavares and the silent, heavy gaze of his father. All his authority, all his pretense of being a devoted son, had crumbled, in minutes revealing the greedy and desperate man behind the mask. He looked at Arthur one last time, not with anger, but with a kind of amazement, as if he couldn't believe he had been defeated by a man who couldn't utter a single word. Without saying more, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was not heavy, but light, purifying. It was the silence after a storm has passed. Lucia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, feeling the knots of tension in her shoulders finally release. Dr. Tavares calmly put the documents away. "I don't think we'll have any more trouble with Marcos for a good while," he said, more to himself. He then approached Arthur and squeezed his shoulder. "You did it, my friend. You protected Helena's promise." Arthur closed his eyes and, for the first time that day, a genuine, albeit small, smile formed on his lips. The battle was over. Dr. Tavares left shortly after, leaving clear instructions and the promise that he would take the necessary legal measures to protect Arthur permanently. When the door closed, the house finally seemed to belong to them again, to Arthur and Lucia. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound, a steady rhythm marking the beginning of a new piece. Lucia looked at Arthur and saw that he was pointing to the kitchen. He was hungry. It was a simple, mundane request, but after the intensity of the last few hours, it sounded like the most beautiful thing in the world. Life, in its most basic form, was returning to normal. As she prepared a simple snack, a sandwich and some juice, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. That day had been a trial by fire for her empathy, her courage, and her intuition. She had gone beyond her duties as a caregiver. She had become a defender, a voice for the voiceless. When she brought the tray to the living room, she found Arthur looking at Helena's photo, which she had put back in its place of honor on the shelf. He turned to her as she approached, and his gaze was one of such profound gratitude that Lucia felt her eyes well up. She sat beside him, and they ate in a comfortable silence, listening to the distant sound of the city settling down for the night. There was no longer a need to decipher urgent gestures or anguished looks. Everything that needed to be said that day had already been expressed through actions, loyalty, and courage. The outcome of the situation wasn't grand or explosive, but it was real. A small victory won within the four walls of a simple house, but it carried the weight of an epic battle. Lucia felt exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired, the depletion of someone who fought for what was right and won. Arthur finished his juice and, in a gesture that surprised Lucia, reached out his hand and touched her arm. The contact was light but firm. He kept his hand there for a long moment, looking directly into her eyes. It wasn't a gesture from boss to employee, nor from patient to caregiver. It was a gesture of pure human connection, an acknowledgement that she had seen him when no one else had bothered to look. In that touch, Lucia understood the magnitude of what she had done. She hadn't just saved a property or a promise. She had given a man back his dignity. Later, with Arthur already sleeping soundly in his room, Lucia sat in the living room armchair, watching the quiet street through the window. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, giving way to a serene reflection. She replayed the day's events in her mind, the morning's agitation, Jonas's suspicion, the discovery of the note, the tension of Marcos's arrival, the silent showdown. It felt as though a whole week had passed between sunrise and sunset. She felt different, as if a layer of her own uncertainty had been forcibly removed, revealing a stronger person underneath. She thought about her work. Before, she saw caregiving as a series of practical tasks infused with affection. Now, she understood it was much more. To care was also to watch over, to protect, to fight. It was to lend her voice, her strength, and her courage to those who had lost theirs. The feeling was overwhelming. It wasn't just a job that paid her bills. It was a calling that, on that day, had been revealed in its fullness. That day had transformed her in a way she was still beginning to understand, solidifying her purpose in an indelible way. Lucia grabbed her bag, ready to go home, but she paused at Arthur's bedroom door for one last look. He was sleeping with a peaceful expression she hadn't seen in months. His forehead, once creased with constant worry, was smooth. His mouth, once tensed in a line of frustration, was relaxed. It was the sleep of someone who felt safe. Seeing him like that was her reward, more valuable than any verbal thanks. That image was the concrete proof that her fight had been worthwhile. It was the silent symbol of her victory. As she closed the front door of the house, she felt the cool night air on her face like a balm. The sky was clear, sprinkled with stars. She looked up, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of the day finally leave her shoulders. She felt not just relief, but a deep sense of pride. Pride that she hadn't ignored her intuition, that she hadn't been intimidated, that she had honored the trust Arthur had placed in her. She knew that from tomorrow on, things would be different. The dynamic with Marcos would change forever, and there might be new legal battles ahead, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that on that day, justice had prevailed. Walking down the quiet street toward the bus stop, Lucia felt the vibration of the day in every part of her body. Every detail, every conversation, every gesture had built a mosaic of transformation. She remembered Arthur's desperate look in the morning and compared it to the serenity of his sleep now. The distance between those two moments seemed like an abyss, and she had crossed it, not alone, but as the main agent of a change that had seemed impossible 12 hours earlier. She smiled to herself in the dark, a tired but genuine smile. That had not been just another day at work. It was the day she understood that the quietest acts of courage could have the most resounding impact. The day a man's fragility became the catalyst for her own strength. As she got on the bus, she sat by the window and watched the city lights go by in a blur. The world outside remained the same, but the world inside her had been irrevocably altered, all because of a look, a photo, and the decision not to stay silent. That day, she knew, would stay with her forever.